going to continue in 1 second. Okay, and as soon as we go on YouTube Live, we will continue. And there we are. Okay. And everyone, bingaritos. Okay. Good. So we continue. So, Amartali, Rabbi Mipnei Man Chasoed. She said to my master, my rabbi, why aren't you eating beans on the previous days? Amarle Kavar Sa'adati Ma'avod Yom. I already ate. She didn't want to insult her. He figured she made a mistake. Amarle Haya Loch Limshach Yotchem Apas. You shouldn't have eaten so much bread, then you'd have room for my yummy beans. Amarle, she said to me, Rabbi, Shema Lo Hanachta Peya B'Rishonim. Maybe you didn't leave something over on your plate the first day, so now you're making up for it by leaving the whole plate over. Because didn't the sages say, you don't leave a remainder in the pot, but you do leave a remainder on the plate. So here's the deal. It's politeness. In other words, if you're serving people, if you pass around a serving pot, you don't have to leave anything in the pot. But it's bad manners in Talmudic terms to eat everything on your plate. Why? Because it shows they didn't give you enough food. You ate it all up. You leave something over, you show the host that they gave you enough food and that you're satiated. So Rabbi? She said, maybe you're making up for being so impolite the first 2 days. So he agreed, and he said, this is one of the times that someone defeated me with words, defeated me in an argument.
Rabbi?
Yes.
That's true in a number of cultures, like in Iran, where if you leave food on your plate, that could mean that you're finished. But if you clean your plate, you need more food.
Right. So that's true. So Rashi says it's a little bit different, that the leftovers are for the server. In those days, food was at a premium. So if you have an inn or a restaurant, the good food they serve at the inn, the server doesn't usually get. So you're supposed to leave a little bit in your plate, and from all the leftovers, you make a plate for the server. That was the practice in those days. So by not providing for the servant, it's bad manners. That is how Rashi explains it.
But in the U.S., many people are taught to clean their plate when they're children. So that
right, because you're thankful that you have food. Right. So at any rate, there are many reasons in many cultures, and I don't doubt that there are other reasons for this custom other than what Rashi said.
And among the Bedouins, if you don't burp, it's an insult.
Right.
Yeah, I've heard that, but I don't know if it's true.
It is true.
Yeah, you know Bedouins?
Do I know Bedouins? Personally, not.
Okay. Anyways, no, because it may be true. It shows that you had good food. That you're so happy with the food. Anyways, so now is there anything deeper here? So okay. Now,
I guess this thing, I'm sorry, Rabbi. I heard Mark and Joe talking, and I think that this is a cultural custom that it's also related to history. In Europe, they also have these. They had these, right? And also in German, there is a verb, as a particular verb, just to express that you ate everything, or you have to eat everything, especially in some times, or when we see the timeline of history, so we understand why people would oblige, for example, children to eat everything. I know that you are not talking about children, but I'm talking about eating everything. And nowadays, we don't leave the rest to the servants and to the people who work for us. because we know that this is not appropriate, this is not hygienical, and so on. So I think that history also relates and influences this kind of
Right. I mean,
habit.
look, the key point here, you're right. The key point here isn't the reason. The key point that this woman was making was that the practice at that time in that place. Oh, Bob, good to see you. I sent you a text to see if you were okay. So
Unfortunately, overslept.
that's okay. It's good that you are sleeping well. It shows that you have a good, clear conscience. People who sleep well have a clear conscience. Anyways, so the thing is like this, that what's going on over here is really quite interesting, because the point isn't whether today we leave food over. Today we are wealthy. In other words, even the poorest person in America can live from food stamps better than 90% of the world lived 100 years ago or 200 years ago. The point is that this was the practice in Israel in the first
But
century.
that's exactly what I'm saying. The
Right,
custom,
and therefore he should have followed.
related to the history.
Now, more than that, Rabbi Yeshua was a very logical person. I think Rabbi Yeshua might have looked around and seen that there was no servant there. You know what I mean? Rabbi Yeshua might have logically seen that there's no reason to leave food over. There's no servant, whatever the reason is. So what she is saying is that even if you don't see a reason to do something, if that's the common practice of the people, the appropriate thing to do is to follow that common practice. Tinokes mahi. This is a great one.
Yeah, and this will lead us to tolerance. Yeah. Understand what I mean? I mean, if you accept the custom of that place, you are more tolerant to that people, to that culture.
Though in this case, Rabbi Yeshua belonged to that community, and this is not so. And this is more about not creating dissension by conforming to the customs of the community if they don't contradict the Torah. The here is not so much, by the way, tolerance, but the importance of something else, conformity. It's important. It's actually a good thing to conform to the customs of a community. And that way you show respect to their customs and to your own community rather than simply following what makes sense to you. But it's all related. Okay. So what's the story with the baby? Pamach is a little girl. Generally speaking, in the Talmud, a tinoket is anyone basically till bar and bat mitzvah. Then they become a naira or a nar, and then they become an adult. So this child, what's the story? So Rabbi Yeshua says, Pamachat hayiti mahalech b'derech. I was walking along the road. Vayasa derech uveret basada. And there was a path going through a field that grows food. Vayiti mahalech ba. And I was walking through it. And the rule is that whenever there's grain growing in a field or vegetables, you're not allowed to walk through it unless there is an accepted public path. If it's not harvest season, if it's not growing or harvest season, Yoshua made a deal with the Jews when they entered the land of Israel that you're allowed to take shortcuts through people's fields. It's a right of way. To this day in England, there are numerous, because the whole country is owned pretty much by one person or the other. There are rights of way through fields and the like. But a right of way gets lost if you don't use it. And therefore, every spring, there's groups of people all over the British countryside who walk through all the rights of way to keep them alive. But at any rate, if it is during the growing or harvesting season, you are not allowed to walk through someone's field out of fear of harming the grain, unless there's a public right of way. So Rabbi Yeshua assumes it's a public right of way, and he's walking on it. Amrili tinoket achat. So a little girl told me, hey, Rabbi, lo sada hiso, isn't this a field? And it's a field in the time of growing, and you're not allowed to walk through a field. Amartila, I told her, lo, it's not a field. Derech kavushahi. It's a well-trodden path. In other words, it must be a public right of way. Amrali, she told me, listim kamoscha, robbers like you, good Jewish chutzpah, kavashua, conquered it. She knew who he was, and she wasn't afraid to tell him. Robbers like you trod in it. In other words, you shouldn't assume that it's a public right of way just because there's a path, because maybe it was made without the will of the owner, where the owner lets people walk through the field and it becomes a established public thoroughfare, then he can't stop it anymore. But in this case, the owner didn't give permission. So she pointed out, just because it looks like there's a path doesn't mean the owner ever gave permission. And so she got the better of him, because she pointed out to him that it's not enough to see a path. You have to know positively, and this is indeed the halacha, you have to positively know that the owner allowed this to become a path. So
the moral of the story is that you can always learn from almost anybody.
Yes, you can learn from anyone. And the other thing is that he accepted it. The big story here isn't, he didn't say, oh, you little mechutzefes, you audacious little girl, I'm big rabbi, you little girl, who are you to tell me what to do? No, he admitted he was wrong and graciously accepted the criticism. This is not so much about the bright little girl, though it is, it's also about Rabbi Yeshua, that he accepted it. And once again, okay. Right. Now, so the Marsha says that Rabbi Yeshua, exactly what we said. The Marsha says that Rabbi Yeshua should have thought about the possibility that this was an illegal path, because this often happens, because a person doesn't always know what's going on in his field till he goes down to harvest. Now we come to the next one, and this is a very famous one, and it's also found in the Medrash Rabbah on Eicha. In the Medrash on Eicha, on the Book of Lamentations, it's describing the brilliance of the children of Jerusalem. But in this case, it's just Stam, a child. But in Eicha, the same thing appears in Medrash Eicha. It discusses it as the brilliance of the children of Jerusalem. So Tina, what is the story with the child? He says, I was once traveling along the road for Isi Tinok, and I saw a little boy, Yoshev Aproshes Derachim, sitting by the on the crossroads. V'amartilo, and I told him, Be'eza derech neilech le'er, what way shall I go to the city? Because there's a crossroads. Amarli, he says to me, Zo Ktsara Varucha, this road is short but long. V'zo Arucha Ktsara, and this road is long and short. Now, what did he mean? He meant as follows: that the short but long road seemed to go straight towards the city, and the long road seemed to go a loop away from the city. So I thought he was just being a wise guy. And I went on the short and long road that went straight towards the city. Even Shagati Le'er, since I got to the city, I found the city was surrounded by vegetable gardens and orchards. And as we discussed earlier, you're not allowed to walk through someone's orchard or garden without permission. So I had no way to get to the city, because it was all private property that you're not allowed to walk through. The Steinsaltzer says, I didn't know the trails leading, I didn't know which way to go. But the general understanding is that that we have whatchamacallit, that simply you cannot get there because you're not supposed to walk through these things. So Chazarti Lochor, I turned back to go to the other road. Amarti Lebani, Amarti Liktsara. I said, my son, the kid was still sitting there playing with something by the side of the road. He says, young man, didn't you tell me this was short? Omali lo amarti lo charucha. Did I not say that that it was far? In other words, it's short because it goes straight, but it's far because you can't get in. And this road loops around. It's the long way, but it gets you to the main entrance to the city. As they used to say in Maine, you can't get there from here.
Right,
Sometimes when asking for directions,
right.
you have to go back on the long road because like very often in Maine, especially by the coast, you have all these little inlets. So the road stops at the water, and unless you want to swim, you can't go that way. Now, Nashaktiv al Rosho, I kissed him on his head, Vamartilo, and I told him, Ashreichem Yisrael, praised are you, Israel, Shekulchem Chachamim, because you're all very wise, Megadolchem Vaktanchem, from your old to your young, because he was a very clever kid. And now, there's a very profound lesson here. And that is that it actually, a very famous Jewish book of Jewish mysticism, it begins with this. In other words, he in the Tanya, which is a very fundamental Hasidic work, he begins by saying, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, who my son is named after, begins by saying that I'm going to express these ideas in a long and short way. And what does this mean? It's actually a very profound point. People, especially us Americans, are always looking for shortcuts. So a lot of times someone says, how can I become a good Jew? How can I attain completeness in my Judaism? So a lot of people have quick answers. Just think about this all day. Just put God's name in front of your face all day. Just, keep this mitzvah. Just recite this verse. Just put your faith in some righteous person. To which we say no. Those are all short but long ways. If you don't work on yourself, on every aspect of your intellect and character, in the end, you'll go far, but then you'll reach a block created by the limitations of your own character that you didn't work on. The only way is the long but short way, that you have to take each aspect of yourself and work on it. And when that's done, move to the next one and the next one. And that's the only way to get to the destination of being a Jew as we should, is through deep effort and struggling with each aspect of ourselves until we perfect one, then move to the next, and so on. And so that's the great wisdom in this little boy's statement.
Yeah, but then you're assuming that he knows his shortcuts. What if he doesn't? He thinks he's perfect. Well, how is he going to learn?
I don't understand the question.
The question is, you say work on those problems every day, you're going to get better. But not everybody recognizes that he has any shortcut, that he has any problems.
Okay, so that's in itself the first part of the long journey, is to make a cheshbon hanefesh, an honest self-evaluation, and to break through the carapace and scabs of one's arrogance and self-importance, so you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, I have problems and I accept them.
Exactly.
And that's part of the long journey.
Yeah.
Part of the long journey is, like I say, is the recognition, as we said, Shabbos and Shul, to have met the enemy and see that it is us.
Which basically all it means is get educated.
Well, it means, many educated people have their issues, but it's a step.
Rabbi?
Now we're going to move on to talking about the wisdom of Jewish women. And now we're going to meet Beruria.
Beruria
is the wife of Reb Meir and a heroine in many ways, and also a tremendous scholar in her own right. There have been many women in Talmudic times who were great scholars, but we don't know the names of too many of them. But Beruria we know about. And Rabbi Yosef Glila Kava Ozel Ba'orcha. Rabbi Yosef Glila was walking along the way. Ashkechei Beruria. And he met Beruria. Amala, he said to her, Be'eza derech neilech l'Lud. What path do we get to go to Lud? Amrle, she said to him, Lo Galili Shaita, foolish Galilean, because the Galileans are not careful with their words. Lo Kach Amru Chachamim, did not the sages say, Al Tarba Sicha Misha, do not talk more than necessary with women who are not related to you. Omer, you just should say which way to Lud. Which to Lud? I know that it's the way. I'm not a dummy. Don't talk too much to women who are not related to you. Now, the point, of course, over here is to make a point. In other words, obviously, if someone is in business, and I don't know, you're a lawyer, and you may spend a lot of time arguing before a judge who's a woman. But the point being that that there is a fundamental modesty, and one should be very careful. And since we're dealing with the sages, Bruri is telling me you have to be extra careful not to engage in idle chit chat with someone of the opposite gender who is not related to you, because this is part of modesty. And
that knowing what we know about Bruria, this one doesn't really fit so well.
Why?
Because she wanted, she didn't believe in that. She was insulted by men quite a bit. The real story is the famous story when she turns the tables on everybody because she's
that's
insulted.
true. But Bruria never said, Joe, Bruria never said more than she had to. That's the point. As we'll see in a moment, Bruria is now going to criticize one of her husband's students. Bruria saw one of the students of her husband. She spoke exactly as much as she needed to. To have a kogore spilachisha. He was studying quietly. Batshabe. Now, the Gemara he translates here that she kicked him, which would be a problem because you're not supposed to go around kicking people unless it's your own kid. But be that as it may, it means to say that she criticized him. She spoke to him harshly, and she told him, Lo kach kosev arucha b'chol u'shmura. Is it not written in Shmuel, arucha b'chol u'shmura, ordered in all things and secure? So we need to look at the book of Shmuel and understand the context, because again, one prefers to understand context. So in other words, you'll see this is another case of Bruria. In this case, Bruria is the author of this medrash, of using a statement different from its way it's usually used. Yeah. Okay. Here. So he speaks in Hashem's name. This is David speaking prophetically, and he says, "Ki lo kain beisi ima ekel ki bris olam shamli arucha b'kol u'shmura." That God has made a promise to me that my household will always be guarded. In other words, that the kingship will always be in the household. But Breuer reads this not about David's kingship, but about David's Torah study. That arucha b'kol, arucha means laid out. That where it is laid out in all your limbs, then it's guarded. Im arucha b'machavam shalcha. If the Torah is guarded in your limbs, which means to say you speak with all your strength and all your might and you wave your arms around. So then mishtameres, then the Torah is guarded. You remember it. And if not, it's not secure. And actually, I recently saw a very interesting article that when people speak about something, they remember it better than not. That's why historically we study with a chavruta, and every time Jews study together, and especially in yeshiva, you study with a partner and you study out loud. I remember that. So when I was doing the teaching at Chabad at Harvard, so we took a group of. There's a program called Sinai Scholars. And part of the program is, besides introducing people who might be very educated, but not in Judaism, to Torah, and to the fundamentals of Judaism, we take them on a trip to a Jewish community. So I took them to my parents' community, where my son was then studying in a very large yeshiva in Brooklyn. And the yeshiva is it's a huge room. There's about 300-400 young men there, and they're all studying together. Anyone who's been in a yeshiva knows they're studying at the top of their lungs. And this was a complete shock to the kids from Harvard. I partnered them with different yeshiva students to introduce them to studying Talmud. But they were shocked that people could concentrate in such, they were used to sitting in a library where if you go above a whisper, everyone yells at you, and to studying alone. And here everyone is studying and arguing and walking around and waving. But you know what? Out of this comes all the intellectual accomplishments of the Jewish people. That when you, and even privately, and there's evidence, a lot of interesting studies recently, that when you say when you speak an idea out loud to yourself, it actually, the very physical involvement actually improves the memory. And there's all kinds of reasons to do with the fact that we have multiple nervous systems and all kinds of interesting research. But Breuer knew this instinctively. So she figuratively kicked him and said, what are you doing? You're only going to know well if you put your body and your energy into it. There's something about involving the entire self that makes learning better. Because the goal is that to remember it. Tana. And we have proof of this. There was a student to Rabbi Eliezer who used to learn only quietly. And after 3 years being away from learning, he completely forgot what he learned. And whereas if you study out loud and say the words to yourself and make yourself understand and hear what you're saying, so you remember it better. One of the reasons given is, an interesting reason, that when you speak to yourself, you hear what you're saying, so you're studying it twice. Once in your mind, and second, when your mind registers hearing you speak what you're saying. So actually, there's a lot of research that supports Breuer's contention here. But she saw
Rabbi,
this. One minute. One second. She saw this in the verse of the book of Shmuel, where David is talking about his household, his kingship, his dynasty. That Arucha B'Kol, it is all organized and guarded. That his household was finally secure after all his troubles and travails and so on. But she understood this to mean David's Torah, because David's Torah was the most important aspect of his life in her understanding. And we know that Breuer was right, because that is how Jews have studied Torah from then till this very day. Joe.
Is the 248 the
the
positive or
yeshiva-
negative commandments?
Wait a minute. The yeshiva that you described, the whole purpose, I think, of it is that they do not study alone. They always study on two by two with a little table. Two people are studying, explaining
Exactly.
to each other,
But
and that's the way to do it.
But also by speaking out loud. In other words, you're right. The chavruta is very powerful. And I know someone who's had a lot of success in special ed with learning challenges by having special ed kids study b'chavruta. Dr. Lazarson, very famous special ed teacher. However, I want to say that even if you're studying alone, you should learn out loud. You remember, Joe, and if you walk in to any synagogue, any shtibel, any synagogue in the Jewish world today, where people are studying, and you'll see it even if you walk into like Yeshiva University. Someone's sitting and studying, they'll be singing with a song. Oh, Marabaya, oh, Marava. People sing loud as they learn. They don't learn quietly.
That's true. It's true. I agree.
Right.
But study with somebody is
Amalei, okay, and we're over, and we'll learn more about learning out loud and maybe meet Breuer again. Okay, so everyone should have a very wonderful day.
Good day.
And, I'm sorry, Bob, you wanted to say something.
Well, no,
248.
is the 248, is that the positive or
Right,
negative?
yes, the 248 positive commandments correspond to the 248 organs in the body. Now, you don't have 248 limbs. Some people means bones, But really,
Bones,
an
bones.
adult is 206 bones, and a baby is born with more than 300, and they fuse. So I once suggested to someone that around bar mitzvah, you're probably up to 248, because not all the bones have finished fusing. So I'm waiting for an anatomist to support my position.
Chag Sameach.
That's the,
Yeah,
that's
we'll
the
see you
thing.
next. It'll be Tu B'Shvat. All the
Right.
best, everyone.
Yom Tov.
Rabbi, that's
See you all.
the,
Did
actually today.
everybody buy their tree?
Chazak Avuru.
Yeah, everyone should
Did
be
Rabbi.
here.
everybody buy their tree?
Rabbi, the famous story is about the surgeon that tells the nurse around the table, do you know the song, this bone is connected to that
Yeah,
bone?
yeah.
She said, so she sings because he doesn't know which bone is connected. So she reminds them.
Okay, so
I'll
and
have to
today we're
tell
still
that to my orthopedist.
and we're still studying today. For 15 minutes, the parsha. Have a great day, everyone. All the best.
Have a fabulous
Thank
day.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.